Welcome to the Cheating Confession Reddit channel. Today, I'm going to share with you a real-life cheating story. It will give you a better understanding of the issue of infidelity today and help you be more cautious when it comes to a cheating wife. Let's dive into this story together.
After a long day at work, I turned on the heater and began making dinner. My stomach growled impatiently as I prepared the meal. I wasn't sure if my wife would be home in time to join me, but I made enough for two just in case. In the end, I ate alone, parked in front of the TV with the news droning on and a half-empty bottle of wine for company. Time slipped by. At some point, I must have fallen asleep during the broadcast because I woke to the noise of a game show. The house was eerily quiet, and Sophie still wasn't back. While it wasn't out of character for her to stay late at work, she almost always let me know if she'd be out past 9. By 10 o'clock, unease set in. Did I forget about an event at her school or some other obligation? My nerves frayed as I kept glancing at the driveway, waiting for her car to appear. What should I do? Feeling I'd waited long enough, I called her workplace. No one answered. I tried her cell phone next, but it went straight to voicemail. Calling the police or nearby hospitals felt premature, and I dismissed the idea of driving to her school. I'd had wine with dinner and wasn't in any condition to be behind the wheel. I forced myself to stay calm, reasoning that her phone might have died, or she'd gotten caught up in something unexpected. She'd surely walk through the door any moment. I went to bed, certain she'd arrive before I drifted off. The next morning I went through my usual routine, though my mind was anything but settled. If Sophie had been in an accident, wouldn't someone have contacted me by now? Her ID listed our address, after all. My growing worry pushed me to take action. I called her workplace again and was put through to the head teacher's secretary. While she knew Sophie, she had no information about her whereabouts. In fact, she told me Sophie hadn't been at work the previous day and that they had planned to reach out to me to check on her. That revelation made my fear even more tangible. Sophie would never skip work without a good reason. Where could she be? Clinging to some sense of normalcy, I went to my own job, though I was consumed by worry. By mid-morning, desperation led me to call our home phone, even though I knew there'd be no answer. The silence of the unanswered rings amplified my anxiety. Finally, I called the police to report Sophie as missing. Speaking the words aloud sent a cold wave of dread through me. My voice shook as I explained the situation, trying to remain coherent. The officer who took my call asked a series of routine questions. When had I last seen her? Did she have health issues? Had I checked with her family? Did she take money, credit cards, or personal items with her? As I answered, I realized how little I truly understood about what had happened. I felt incompetent and helpless. The officer explained that missing adults weren't always prioritized unless there was evidence of foul play, but they'd need a recent photo of Sophie. I promised to provide one. With that, Sophie was officially classified as a missing person. Left to my own devices, I decided to leave work early and gather the photo for the police. Returning home after lunch, the emptiness of the house hit me hard. I began searching for anything out of place, following the officer's advice. That's when I noticed a pile of empty hangers in our bedroom and realized her overnight bag was missing. A deeper look revealed more gaps. Her laptop and phone chargers were gone too. I called her mobile again, but it went straight to voicemail, just like before. Reaching out to her parents felt like the next logical step. Her father answered. While he didn't seem overly alarmed, he also didn't have any helpful information. His tone was strangely awkward, even apologetic, which left me feeling even more unsettled. Later, I went to the local police station to hand over Sophie's photo, only to learn they had no record of my earlier call. Frustrated, I repeated everything and answered the same questions again before they finally accepted the picture. When I asked what I should do next, the officer's response was curt. Go home and carry on as usual. Let us know if she turns up. Most people do. The detached professionalism made sense, but it did little to ease my turmoil. Back home, the truth loomed over me. I wasn't naive. The evidence was clear. An absent wife, missing belongings, and complete silence. Sophie hadn't been in an accident or abducted. She had left, and she'd done so on purpose. But why? I replayed the past in my mind, wondering if I should have seen it coming. After 5 years of marriage, I thought I knew her well. We lived a quiet, predictable life, busy with work during the week and enjoying simple pleasures on weekends, eating out, visiting friends, or working on the house. Sophie seemed content to let me take the lead in most things. She enjoyed shopping, good food, and the occasional getaway, and I always made an effort to indulge her. Our last trip, a winter holiday in Venice, had been wonderful. She'd shown no signs of unhappiness or dissatisfaction. Sophie wasn't the type to keep secrets or flirt with others. She left her phone out in the open, and her schedule was steady. When would she even have found the time for an affair? Yet the facts were undeniable. She had left intentionally, taking only what she needed. My thoughts circled back to her workplace. Could someone there be involved? Teachers couldn't easily switch jobs mid-term, and Sophie had worked hard to build her career. Still, nothing else made sense. She had chosen to disappear, leaving me behind to face the hollow truth. For days I wandered through life in a daze, too shattered to talk about what had happened. Then, a week later, the silence broke. A call from the police. Sophie's vehicle was found deserted in a city center parking structure. I reluctantly went to claim it, muttering under my breath about the exorbitant fee I had to pay. As I handed over the money, the parking attendant cheerfully highlighted the time stamped on the ticket. 7:30 a.m., the same morning Sophie vanished. Shortly afterward, the police reached out again. This time they found out that Sophie had withdrawn $1,000 in cash from a bank next to the parking lot. Since that transaction, her account had shown no further activity. The tone of the investigation shifted noticeably. The officers' inquiries became sharper and their actions more methodical. It was evident they now regarded her disappearance as serious. That evening, I allowed them access to the house for further inspection. Before their arrival, I decided to visit her workplace and speak with the deputy head teacher. He confirmed that Sophie had not made any contact. The deputy head teacher seemed determined to emphasize the seriousness of her absence. As the leader of the business studies department, her unavailability was causing chaos. Her classes were untaught, and her team, composed of mostly inexperienced teachers, was left without guidance. I offered polite sympathy but couldn't suppress my own frustration. I suggested, with a touch of bitterness, that it was someone else's problem now. "The police are handling it," I said curtly. "Surely you must know something. They won't overlook any loose ends." He appeared startled, but quickly regained his composure. "I'm not sure what you're implying, but she hasn't been here. Trust me, I wish she had." If he was concealing anything, his demeanor betrayed no hint of it. "If you hear anything, please inform us," he said earnestly. "Sophie is a valued colleague, and everyone here is deeply concerned." His sincerity took me by surprise. If he and Sophie had been involved romantically, he had rehearsed his responses well. I felt increasingly adrift, my emotions clouding my judgment as I pursued fleeting suspicions. My thoughts strayed to the possibility of Sophie fleeing with a secret lover. Yet if this lover existed only in my imagination, what other explanations could there be? Perhaps she'd experienced a mental health crisis. Could the pressures of her job have overwhelmed her, driving her to leave in shame? But this seemed improbable. Sophie was adept at concealing her emotions. If she'd been struggling, wouldn't she have turned to her family for support? I recalled my earlier conversation with her father, which only deepened my uncertainty. A darker possibility crossed my mind. What if she'd been abducted? Perhaps she had gone downtown that morning to purchase a gift, maybe for a coworker, and something terrible had occurred. Determined to get answers, I resolved to ask the police whether they had reviewed CCTV footage from the area. When I returned home that evening, a strange feeling swept over me. It was as though Sophie had been there recently. I moved cautiously through the house, glancing into the living room as I headed for the kitchen. Had I seen or smelled something out of place? Could she still be inside? I bolted upstairs, half expecting to confront an intruder. Each bedroom was empty. Back in the kitchen, I noticed that my coffee cup, previously on the table, had been placed in the dishwasher. Next to it sat another mug, faintly stained with rose hip tea. Only Sophie drank that. I searched for more clues. Checking the compost bin yielded nothing, But outside in the trash, I found a damp tea bag wrapped in a plastic bag along with some tissues. The effort to hide it seemed sloppy, almost deliberate. Why would she try to conceal her visit? I scoured the house for additional signs. After an hour of searching, I discovered that her red shoes and summer jacket were missing. I distinctly remembered the shoes being in her wardrobe and the jacket hanging in the downstairs closet on a purple hanger. These details felt significant enough to report to the police. When I called, an officer transferred me to a female detective. She listened as I described Sophie's apparent return. "Mr. Lambton," she said calmly, "we'd like you to come in. We're making progress on the case and would like to update you." Her tone left me uneasy. Was I back under suspicion? "That's fine," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Should I come now?" "Tomorrow morning at 10, she instructed. "Ask for DC Thompson." The next morning, I arrived at the station early. I was led to a small, unadorned room and left alone for a few moments. When DC Thompson entered, she sat across from me, her posture professional. The open door and plain surroundings gave the room a sterile, almost intimidating atmosphere, and I couldn't help wondering if this was meant to feel like an interrogation. "Mr. Lambton," she began, her tone measured, "we can confirm that your wife is safe. This is no longer a matter for the police. Nothing has happened to her. She left of her own accord. She waited until you left for work, collected some belongings, and departed with an overnight bag. You might want to reflect on why she felt unable to tell you directly." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach, but she continued. "We've examined her emails, which show that she had been planning this for some time. She arranged to meet a man she'd been corresponding with. There's no mystery here. It was a personal decision on her part." She opened a file, flipping through its contents before showing me pages of email exchanges. Each message was time-stamped, and the correspondence left no room for doubt. "These conversations make her intentions clear," she said. "I'm sorry, but this is the reality." I felt dizzy, struggling to form a coherent response. "Who is this man?" I finally asked. "How could she have built such a relationship without me noticing?" Her expression softened slightly. "I understand how difficult this is for you," she said. "But in most cases like this, the person isn't truly missing. They're avoiding someone. Sophie didn't disappear. She made a choice to start anew. I suggest you take some time to process this." She paused before adding gently, "Go home, Mr. Lambton. Focus on what's good in your life. With time, this will feel less overwhelming." "Where are they?" Her reply adhered strictly to protocol. "No crime had been committed," she stated calmly. "Your wife left of her own accord. She does not wish to be found. The authorities showed no concern for her motives and refused to disclose the identity of the individual she had met. As of now, the case is closed. She is no longer listed as a missing person. You should move forward with your life. If you intend to locate her, you'll need to engage a lawyer. It is likely that any legal or financial matters will prompt her to reach out through a solicitor." The detective's phone buzzed, and she stood up abruptly, signaling that the conversation was over. I remained seated, paralyzed by the weight of it all. As she walked away, speaking into her phone, I leaned forward, opened the file on the desk, and skimmed through the pages until my eyes landed on the Hotmail headers. The emails were numerous, short, and spanned several pages. My attention was drawn to the nickname Dibble, a name I had once called Sophie. The sender's email address began with H. Fardament, and each message was signed Harry Hardiment. One line leapt out at me. "Soon it won't be long and we can finally be happy." Before I could process more, Detective Thompson returned. I sat up quickly, leaving the file untouched. If she noticed my actions, she gave no indication. Extending her hand, she made it clear our meeting was over. "I need to leave now. Go home. Tomorrow will feel brighter." I thanked her and left. Walking through the shopping center, I observed the ordinary rhythms of life. Mothers navigating strollers, elderly men strolling toward the library, teenagers loitering in clusters. It had been years since I'd wandered downtown during the late morning. Everything felt precarious, as if the ground beneath me had shifted, leaving me untethered under the harsh light of day. By the time I reached home, I had formed a plan. The first step was to rid the house of Sophie's belongings. I combed through drawers and cupboards, filling bags with her possessions, all while one name echoed in my mind: Harry Hardiment. The name sounded familiar. Did I know him? With the hallway now cluttered with bags, I loaded the car and drove to a charity shop. After unloading the items, I lingered to glance at the books displayed in the shop window. Among them was an old car maintenance manual. The sight of it triggered a memory. During university, I had owned a dilapidated Mini, not a collector's item, but an inexpensive, practical car. Its rusting body and temperamental engine had consumed much of my free time. The connection to Harry Hardiment lingered as I drove to the municipal dump to dispose of the remaining bags. As I fed the waste into the crusher, a sudden realization struck me. Rushing home, I booted up my computer and sent emails to 2 former university acquaintances. Then, I resumed clearing the house of Sophie's presence until exhaustion overtook me, and I collapsed in front of the television. When I awoke, it was evening, and the thought of staying in the house alone felt unbearable. I ventured to a pub and watched football. The next day, I managed to get through work. On my way home, I picked up a ready-made curry and naan bread. After eating and showering, I finally checked my email. There was a reply. The email confirmed that Harry Hardiment had been the student union president during my final year at university. Digging through boxes in the attic, I found an old souvenir copy of the student union magazine. There he was, smiling in a group photo. I responded to the email. Any idea how to get in touch with Harry? The reply came quickly. Not sure, but I'll pass your question along. 2 days later, I received a lead from someone who had seen him at a reunion. He worked in marketing for a bank in the city. A simple internet search provided the address of the bank's head office in Moorgate. The plan was straightforward. I caught the first train and arrived outside the building at 7:30 a.m., prepared to wait all day if necessary. Early arrivals streamed through the entrance, but I didn't think I'd missed him. Stationed across the street, I observed the steady flow of professionals entering the building. At 8:55 a.m., I spotted someone who matched Harry's description. I crossed the street, confident he wouldn't recognize me. Harry, engrossed in a phone call, moved through the revolving door without noticing my presence. I followed, stopping at the security barrier as he used his pass to proceed. Feigning confusion, I asked a guard if this was the Bank of England. He spoke little English, and by the time our conversation ended, Harry had disappeared into an elevator. Certain I had identified him, I retreated to a nearby Starbucks to wait. Whether he left for lunch or at the end of the day, I intended to follow. Hours passed, punctuated by 6 coffees and 3 slices of walnut and apricot cake. Finally, at 5 p.m., Harry reappeared. He walked briskly, and I hurried to keep pace. He boarded the Central Line tube heading east. When he exited, he made his way to a modern apartment complex in a quiet cul-de-sac. I trailed closely, slipping into the building just before the door closed behind him. The building had 4 floors and a dozen apartments. I followed him to the top floor, arriving just as he unlocked his door. "Well, Harry," I said, my voice low and cold, "I'm your worst nightmare." "Get out! Leave now!" he stammered. "Where is she, Harry?" I demanded, my eyes scanning the apartment for any trace of Sophie. "Who?" he retorted, fumbling with his pocket and pulling out his phone. I swatted it to the floor and shoved him. "Where is she?" "There's no one here! What are you doing? Get out of my home!" he pleaded, panic etched on his face. His dark, curly hair stood in disarray. A quick glance into the bedroom revealed a double bed but no sign of a woman's presence. Fear gripped me. What if I never found the answers I sought? "Please," Harry begged. "What do you want?" "Don't be afraid," I said coldly. "Just tell me where she is." "If you threaten me, I'll call the police," he warned. "They already know about you, Harry. They're the ones who led me here. A woman disappears with a banker? You can bet they're interested." His voice wavered. "Sophie's not here." The truth hit me like a freight train. He knew her. Deep down, I'd already suspected it, but hearing the confirmation was something else entirely. "You know where she is," I said, my voice cutting through the tension. "She's never been here. Stop pretending. Just tell me everything." "All right," he conceded, his tone defensive. I'll tell you, but I haven't done anything wrong. Yes, we met up. It was a simple reunion for old time's sake. We had dinner in Soho, caught up, and then she left. That's not good enough, Harry, I said coldly. And don't think I'm stupid. I know who you really are, Neville. But let's not forget, I knew her first. The word stung. Was he implying Sophie had been with him before me? She'd never mentioned his name, not once. There wasn't time to unravel that thread, though. If you're telling the truth, I pressed, then you were the last person to see her. You should worry about yourself, I snapped. She came to you and now she's vanished. Did she turn you down? What? No, that's ridiculous, Harry spluttered. She's working in Bloomsbury now. I have no idea where she's staying, but I'm being honest. Keep talking. We met a few times, he admitted, his voice quieter now. I pushed for it. I've been lonely, and yes, I hope to rekindle something. She gave me the impression it was possible, but in the end, she didn't want me. That's the truth. I don't know where she's living, and she refused to meet me again. She's working for a small publisher, Skimpole and Stephen, I think, in Gordon Square. She's doing proofreading. I stared at him, searching his face. All right, Harry. Enjoy your miserable life. As I turned away, his posture slackened, relief washing over him as if his ordeal had ended. You've got no right to act this way, he called after me, his voice sharp. If Sophie left you, it's for the best. You didn't deserve her. You ruined her life. You're filth. I let out a bitter laugh. There's no need for me to kick you while you're down, Harry. You're not the real problem. As I descended the stairs, the door to the flat below creaked open, and an elderly woman peered out cautiously, clearly unnerved by the commotion. Your upstairs neighbor, Mr. Hardiman, shouldn't bring women like that into a respectable building, she muttered, her disapproval dripping from every word. It's unfair to the other tenants. I brushed past her without responding, my mind racing. By the time I reached the street, a heavy sense of despair had settled over me. Could I trust Harry's version of events? He'd deliberately kept his story sparse, omitting details, like how they had arranged their meetings or the emails they must have exchanged. It wasn't what I'd anticipated. I had expected to find them together, ready to confront them both. Instead, I was left with more questions and a gnawing sense of doubt. What had he meant by claiming to know her first? I didn't believe his denials. More likely they'd reconnected and tried to revive an old romance. But was I ready to face Sophie now? The truth was becoming painfully clear. She had known Harry before me. Though I hated admitting it, they had rediscovered each other, and he'd likely convinced her their past love was still alive. Perhaps this had been happening for months, culminating in her leaving me. Too ashamed to confess her betrayal, she'd run off to start over with him. And here I was, trapped in the role of the betrayed husband chasing his wife's lover, seeking answers and retribution. Had Sophie expected me to find her, to confront her in some dramatic scene that would justify her decision to leave? Maybe. A game of hide-and-seek only works if the seeker eventually finds the one hiding. That night, alone in a cramped hotel room in Earl's Court, I decided I had to see her. If there was more to this story, it was the chapter where the wife admits her wrongdoing and pleads for forgiveness. I took another day off work and stationed myself outside her publisher's office in Bloomsbury early the next morning, arriving just before 8. There was nowhere to conceal myself, so I leaned against the railings across the street, feigning interest in my phone. The street was quiet, with no one paying me any attention, yet I felt exposed. If Sophie and Harry were still in contact, he might have warned her about me. She could easily avoid work and vanish into London's anonymity. The thought left me restless. Part of me hoped Harry would show up again. I wouldn't have hesitated to vent my frustrations on him once more. By 10, my patience was wearing thin. Just as I turned to leave, Sophie appeared, hurrying past me and slipping into the building. She didn't notice me, her head down, clutching her bag tightly. Her brisk pace and focused demeanor gave the impression of someone eager to lose herself in her work. After hours of waiting, all I'd managed was a fleeting glimpse of her, an unremarkable figure lost in routine. It felt hollow. I told myself that seeing her, even briefly, should be enough. But it wasn't. Not after everything. So I lingered, convincing myself that a few more hours wouldn't matter after years in a failing marriage. I bought a pair of binoculars from a nearby shop and found a vantage point in the park, positioning myself to watch the office entrance. The hours crawled by. She didn't leave for lunch, and no one else entered or exited until late afternoon. At 4, a group emerged, Sophie among them. I followed from a distance as they walked to Euston Station. When the group dispersed, Sophie headed for the Victoria line. What followed was an absurd pursuit across the West End. She walked leisurely, while I struggled to keep up without drawing attention. On the crowded train, I observed her from a neighboring carriage, her gaze fixed ahead, showing no sign of awareness. If Harry had warned her, it wasn't apparent. The chase ended at John Lewis, where she wandered through handbags and shoes before stopping at the bistro on the top floor. It seemed like the kind of place she might meet a friend for coffee or dessert. I joined the queue behind her, watching as she ordered soup. She never looked back. Tray in hand, she found a seat by the window and sat in stillness, her weariness evident. I stood nearby, trying to steady myself. This was the woman I'd spent years with, the one who had vanished from my life without explanation. And now, here she was, just a few steps away, entirely unaware of my presence. As I watched her, she spread butter on her bread and stirred her soup, trying to cool it. "Hi, Sophie," I said softly. My greeting startled her. She flinched and spilled a bit of soup. Fearing she might leave, I quickly slid onto the bench beside her, blocking her way out. "Neville," she said, her voice tight. "How did you find me? What do you want?" "Relax, Sophie," I replied. "It's good to see you. I'm not here to drag you back. Stay and enjoy your coffee." She studied me, and I returned her gaze. It was a curious, cautious exchange, filled with an unspoken yearning for familiarity. Her hair was shorter now, lending her a youthful look. I'd always told her I preferred it long, and now she wore makeup, lipstick, eyeliner. These changes unsettled me, as they contrasted starkly with the woman I had once loved. Memories of our past crept in, stirring feelings I thought I'd buried. Why should I care about someone who had walked away from me? Anger bubbled beneath the surface, but I worked hard to stay composed. Instead of lashing out, I simply said, "I'm doing fine. I'm not here to accuse you of anything." She gave a slight nod, as if that was the bare minimum she had expected, but she stayed silent. "I've spoken to Harry," I added, watching for her reaction. Her face remained neutral, but I caught a flicker of concern in her eyes. "I needed closure," I explained. "You left to start over with him, but I didn't know that at first. For a long time I thought something terrible had happened to you. It took time to uncover the truth." She looked up at me, and for the first time her gaze was open and honest. It was as though she was only now beginning to grasp the weight of her actions. "This is on me, not you. If you've talked to Harry, then you know it wasn't worth it. Leaving was a mistake, but don't worry. I'm not asking to come back. I know I've ruined any chance of that. I've proven myself untrustworthy, selfish. You deserve better." Her words stung. "You left me. It was a mistake, you say. But what could I have done to drive you away?" "You didn't do anything wrong," she admitted. "I just felt trapped. I needed a clean slate. I wasn't happy and I wasn't good for you. Planning a life with Harry felt like a way to escape, a way to give my life meaning. But that was just the truth of it. I didn't intend to hurt you. I thought that if I disappeared without a word, you'd never know what I'd done, and it would spare you the pain. I hoped you'd move on and forget me, little by little." Her confession didn't soothe my anger. "So I'm supposed to just accept that?" "I don't expect you to," she said quietly. "I only want you to understand that it wasn't about you. I didn't leave to hurt you. I left to escape myself." Her words hung between us, and I shrugged, trying to suppress my frustration. It felt indulgent to dwell on my own pain when hers seemed so consuming. "We barely talked back then," she continued. "We lived side by side, avoiding what was missing in our lives. You might not want to hear this, but our marriage wasn't something to be proud of." "I was happy," I said simply. She winced at my response. "Harry listened to me," she admitted. "He made me feel good, and I thought I owed it to both of us to see what we could have together. He deserved my time. You make very few close connections in life, and he was one of mine. Why should I have ignored that? Because I valued our marriage, I replied. And I knew I was being selfish, she countered. But why should I have to go through life feeling like I've missed out? I left thinking Harry was my future. I'll admit it, I was ashamed. I couldn't face you with the truth, so I left when you weren't home. And yes, it was a mistake. The moment I saw Harry, I realized I'd confused my dreams with reality. He wasn't the solution I imagined him to be. Don't insult me by suggesting I didn't understand the consequences of my actions. She held my gaze, her intensity forcing me to mask my feelings. I felt relieved to hear her admit the truth, but I was numb, incapable of imagining any future with her. Do you have a decent place to live? I asked. She laughed, a brittle sound. This is London. Only the wealthy live well. I'm in a tiny flat that feels like a student dorm. It's fine, though. It makes me feel young. I'm hoping to get a teaching job next term to help with finances. London is desperate for experienced teachers, and I have nothing else to do but work. Will your old school give you a reference? I'll get a doctor's note, she said with a weak smile. It'll say I had a breakdown. Isn't that close enough to the truth? I'm not sure what's best anymore, I admitted. If we sell the house, we could each start over. You'll need money to settle in London. I'll go along with whatever decision you make. No, she said firmly. That's just another way of running away. We need to decide together. The house affects us both. But I gave up my rights when I left, she added. I don't expect you to include me in your plans. Stop that, I said. This isn't about revenge. It's about doing what's right. Selling the house makes sense. It'll give us both a chance to move on. But you're right. This is a joint decision. We should work together where it matters. She looked at me thoughtfully. Maybe this is the real me now, the person I'm becoming. Let's admit that our marriage wasn't working. I'm angry at you for the hurt we caused each other, but I don't want to destroy your future. If I'd been honest about my feelings, maybe things would have been different. Leaving without a word was cruel, and I regret it. But we can't change the past. Her final words lingered. We weren't right for each other. There's no point in prolonging our unhappiness. I don't know what to believe anymore. Life is far more complicated than I ever thought. You're still searching for the right person, but I can't wait forever for you to make up your mind. I need to move on. Dwelling on what went wrong serves no purpose. I don't hate you, but I've stopped caring for you too. Maybe that's just how things are meant to be. Relationships often start simply because people are nearby each other. But in marriage, your partner should be the one who truly matters most. Marriage isn't a trial run. I did care for you. In many ways, I still do. I thought that leaving quietly would be the least painful choice for you. This way, you wouldn't have to face the fact that I'd found someone else. At least, that's how I rationalized my decision. You'd have preferred I imagine you gone rather than unfaithful. I'm sorry, but at the time, it seemed like the best course of action. When I discovered you'd left to meet another person, I couldn't comprehend how you had kept such a secret life. We were always so busy. Sophie, tell me, who is Harry? Was he your first? Why didn't you ever tell me about him? She paused, her movements hesitant, first shaking her head, then nodding. Finally, she spoke. If you want the truth, yes, he was my first. It was during my first year at university, long before you came into my life. She continued. I never mentioned him because, by the time we met when I was 18, he was just a piece of my past. He felt irrelevant to what we had, and honestly, I was insecure. I didn't think it was something to share with a new boyfriend. Harry was confident, well-connected, and I was naive. Sure, I liked him, just like I liked Matt, but there was no genuine connection. He was always preoccupied with his career in the union, and I was busy with my studies. At the time, I didn't think what we had was serious, but when he reached out years later, I realized feelings I had buried still lingered. We began emailing. It felt harmless, or at least I convinced myself it was. I never intended to start an affair. To me, he was just a friend. I was struggling, work was exhausting, and I had no one to confide in. I didn't want to burden you with my troubles. That's when the lies began to take root. I thought keeping a bit of emotional distance from you would shield us both. It created a space where I could talk to Harry without hurting what we had. It wasn't about intimacy, she said. But is it ever possible for a woman to maintain a friendship with a man without it turning into something more? He was supportive. He'd email me after work, checking on how I was doing. In the end, how could I refuse when things escalated? She met my eyes and confessed, "Yes, I left you for a man I thought would love and care for me forever. I believed we understood each other, that we'd find happiness together. Leaving you was painful, but I convinced myself that in 10 years, I'd look back and be grateful for the decision. And I told myself you'd be happier too. You deserve more than a marriage where love has faded and resentment grows. Leaving felt like the right choice. Until I saw Harry again." She paused. "Neville, can we talk over a drink? There's so much I need to tell you. If this really is goodbye," she added, "I want us to part on good terms." I shook my head. "I'm sorry, Sophie, but no. A drink won't fix this. I can't forgive you for what you've done. The hurt runs too deep." It wasn't a scar, but an open wound, still bleeding. We needed to talk, but we weren't the kind of friends who could sit and share a conversation. Her face hardened as she seemed to brace herself for my rejection, as though she'd expected it. "I'm sorry, Sophie," I repeated. She flinched but quickly masked her pain with a detached response. "Me too," she said quietly. "Goodbye, Neville." And with that, we parted ways. I caught the tears in her eyes. She was shattered, fully aware of her mistake, and longing to return. But she wouldn't ask outright. Her eyes pleaded for something, forgiveness, a second chance. In our relationship, I had always been the one to fix things. I had always been the one to say we could repair the damage, that with effort, we could make it work. But this time was different. She was remorseful, and I was deeply wounded, but I couldn't move beyond it. She had planned her departure knowing it would destroy me. I was collateral damage, an acceptable loss in her eyes. That realization made me furious, and I knew it always would. I wrestled with what I truly wanted. I still cared for her. That much was undeniable. But could I go back? The idea seemed plausible only because I feared being alone. My life might very well spiral downward from this point. But fear of loneliness wasn't enough to justify taking Sophie back. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.